Hi there, good to see you again.
Hey. Well, thank you. I actually loved your presentation. I mean, I'm one of your students in the past, and I know a lot about this, but always amazing to listen to you, Roger. So thanks for reminding me some things. So I'm here today to talk about temples. It's a subject that is very dear to my heart. It's a subject that I've been passionate about since many years. And all started by simple questions like, why did all these ancient people basically spend so much money and resources and time to build these huge structures? And was it just a matter of spirituality and worship of gods, or was there more to it? So that was a question I had many years ago, and I just went on this journey to find answers. So today I'm going to present to you my main findings. I did a 5-year PhD on that, trying to look at the relationship of temples and location, how they are placed in random places or not. We will see some examples today. And for those of you that never heard of me, I'm an architect. I'm a holistic architect. I have done also a master in sustainable environmental design, and then went deeper into feng shui and sacred geometry. I studied a lot of different things. And well, one of my missions is to, let's say, decode all this wisdom from the past and bring it on so we can actually incorporate it in creating modern sacred and healing spaces. Like, not only sacred, because maybe for a lot of you that might sound like religious, but sacred in terms of science. That's my main focus. So lovely to be with you, and let me just share my screen. Okay. Is it okay? You can see my screen, right?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, then. So I'd like to invite you to have a look at the next images that I'm going to show you. They are like images from temples around the world, temples from different categories. And I would like to show you a different way to see them, not just as a architectural design, but more as a physicist, maybe. So one thing to start looking at is how interestingly these buildings are designed, like almost like an antenna. And why is that? And we don't see buildings that are straight lines. And that goes back to the concept of fractality that Dan Winter has been exploring so many years, and I find it fascinating. So we see repetitions of bigger parts of the building in smaller parts, and so on and so forth. And that's a very important finding that maybe you will understand later through the presentation. But for now, you know, crossing different cultures and crossing different religions and different climate zones that sometimes end up into very different architectural design, we see that this is a concept that just goes across all these different cultures, right? And it's very interesting. It's definitely something that caught my attention. And if you just zoom out, as I have here, and you just see all these little patterns, it's really more and more clear how these buildings are meant to look like an antenna. So why is that interesting? Let's take a little journey around the world, looking at temples. For example, Asia, these different designs, older temples. I will not share any construction date because I don't agree with a normal archaeologist in terms of what they suggest. I think most of these structures are very old. So you see this fractality of this repetition of the whole shape of the building into smaller parts. And again and again in different architectural environments. This is in Indonesia. And then you wonder, you see these buildings and you wonder, why would they go into this level of detail to build all these tiny bits again and again? And if you zoom into it, there are smaller bits into it, repeated, so on and so forth, if this is just purely for aesthetics or worship. So I had a gut feeling that this had like more of a very significant application for the people that build it. My feeling was that the peoples of any time in our history would not spend so much resources and time and energy for something that would not bring them back something significant, right? These structures are enormous and they take a lot of work, sometimes centuries. Sometimes it took more than a century to finish some of these temples. So again, this concept of the contour fractality, but also the repetition of these smaller pieces. Again, great level of endless contours, right? Not a straight line anywhere. Very interesting. India, more temples in India here. Extreme level of craftsmanship, right? I mean, I can imagine that even looking at them, you don't need to even visit, you know, something starts to happen because these buildings have so much harmonics and fractality embedded into them that just looking at them, it's actually very healing. So more in India, like, what exactly does this shape remind you? It's exactly built like an antenna, once again. More beauty in India, Thailand. We are still in Asia here. Older temples in Vietnam. This is one of my favorite temples. Actually, I have been there. I'm sure Roger knows this place by heart, but I have been there and it's a marvelous place. I just couldn't stop. I don't know, I was completely mesmerized and I was just really feeling that, yeah, it's a temple of heaven. Like if you could bring heaven on earth, this is one way to do it for sure. Beautiful place. Japan, Indonesia, again, just look at this contour everywhere. So much detail. More temples in India, so many different kinds of aesthetic, but then again, this main characteristic is the same. And then you wonder what happens in other places in the world. I happen to be Greek, so I will share some Greek temples. Again, I will say this, because also I'm an architect, there is no need for so many columns in these temples, by the way. Like structurally to hold the roof, these temples are far more than needed. And the reason for that is that they were trying to create some sort of acoustics and harmonics into the energy world. So whatever happens, you know, in the music world and in the sound world, it's actually the same in the energy world. So they were really creating some special harmonics. But again, they wanted to actually craft these columns and sculpt them with all these like little lines. And if you see them close enough, they have a concave sculpting. And that creates a very high level of fractality. They could just have a square column. Why not? That's the easiest to do. And you will see that in temples around Greece. In any temple, it was very characteristic. So it's very significant to the engineering of these places to achieve what they wanted to achieve. Mosques, I mean, that's an extreme level of sacred geometry. If you ask me, I have never seen this level of craftsmanship in any temples in the world. And one might wonder again, why would they go into so much detail and embed so much geometry, complex geometry like this, and also in 3D, which at that time was even more difficult. Remember, they didn't have 3D printing at that time or 3D modeling. They did everything by hand. How does one calculate this level of complexity? I still wonder. So much beauty and so much complex things for just worship. Well, I don't think so personally. Pyramids, There are a lot of pyramids around the world, more than we know. I can tell you we have pyramids in Greece that are absolutely unknown, and pyramids were very significant in the ancient times for many reasons, starting from the ziggurats of Iraq, going to Egypt, of course, Mexico. I have visited some of those myself, and it's actually gigantic, I have to tell you. These monuments are far from anything you can conceive from an image. And even for those of you that have visited some of them, you will know that this is very important. Creating such a huge size, why? Why create a huge pyramid that is actually not functionable? I mean, it's not with rooms or things that people can use, right? Mexico, Chichen Itza, most of you will know this place. Incredibly beautiful place. And then we go to stone circles. Stone circles is also another type of temple. And we find those a lot around Europe, and then huge places in Africa that have these stone ruins. Obviously in France, Karnak, Sweden. And then these rocks are huge, they weigh tons, and most of these times they were brought from some faraway place. And we will explore that in this presentation. Why would they choose different stone than what they could find locally? I mean, that's very impractical, right? And then we have other megalithic monuments like Newgrange in Ireland. We have mounds, Petra that was just carved in pure rock. This is one of my favorite temples, the Kailasa temple in India. Look at this, again, this fractality and the contours everywhere. And this is actually a solid rock. So it's a solid temple carved in the rock. And then we go to medieval cathedrals. I mean, the images speak from themselves, this level of antenna everywhere, embedded everywhere, right? So beautiful and also so functional, as you will understand today. All around Europe, this is definitely one of my favorite. I will recommend you to visit if you haven't already. It's Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, and it really mixes different religions together. There are symbols from different religions, so it's a very interesting one. France, and now we'll go deeper into what has been the results of my research for around 15 years. What makes a temple? What are the main elements, apart from what we have already seen now, that actually constitute a place to be a sacred space? So I have found 3 important things that are common around the world. And the first one is the earth link. So the earth link means, where was the temple built? What is going on under the place where it was built? So I guess most of you have heard about the earth grids and the background radiation that we have in the planet. And actually, this is the one that supports life. And we also know that there are places that are more beneficial and places that are less beneficial. And that was used to be called geopathic stress. It's a term that I don't like so much because it means that the earth by itself is pathogenic, but we will see something later that is very interesting. So all these grids were known to our ancestors. They used different ways to find these areas and detect them. This in Feng Shui, for example, they call them dragon lines, and they were like very strict in where to build and where not to build. So geobiology, which is what I studied in my PhD, is basically how a site and its various characteristics can affect the biosphere. And Hippocrates mentions something very interesting concerning nutrition, which is one of his main books. And he says that the geographic location and the ground typology are equally important health factors as nutrition. So he says that one cannot be healed if many parameters are not taken into consideration. And that's, for example, their age, the climate where they live in, a lot of other things, including the ground typology. So This is the actual text translated in English and from the ancient Greek, right? So he explains all these parameters. Now, coming to geophysical anomalies, that's the term that I use in my work and my research instead of geopathic stress. So an anomaly basically means that there is an area that we have a change in some of the parameters of the field, such as the magnetic field, the gravitational field, etc. And I will explain in as short as I can, because this is a very big subject, 4 types of geophysical anomalies that I found that was the most significant in temple locations. So one phenomena has to do with geoelectricity, and that happens basically in simple words. When there is a kind of material in the soil that is conductive, then any change in the intensity of a magnetic field will generate an electrical current. Why are we interested in that? Because there are a lot of shifts in the magnetic field daily, and there is a daily rhythm that has to do with the sun and the moon and all these things. So these create shifts, and that can create by itself electricity in the ground. So we have telluric currents. These telluric currents by themselves create also another magnetic field. So this is the first type. So for example, because of the shifts of the magnetic field, we have telluric currents in the ground where we have conductive material. The second type is hydrogeophysical phenomena, and this happens in a phenomenon that is called adsorption. And that's where electrons basically are removed from the rainwater as they pass through the porosity of the rock. And what happens is that the water molecules are left positively charged and the ground is left negatively charged. In simple terms, that creates electricity, and that creates, again, shifts in the geomagnetic field. The third type of this phenomena is geological phenomena. So one important thing to understand here is that when we have 2 types of soil meeting somewhere, either through a fault or some other discontinuity, that actually creates an effect that is called conductivity discontinuity, and that can weaken or potentiate the daily fluctuations, sometimes over 100 times. So this is an example of looking at electric potential over a cross-section with underground water. So we know, for example, that when we have underground water, then we have a difference in electrical charge. And the 4th type of phenomena is light phenomena. So it has been seen in a lot of research that above seismic faults, there is an intense finding of, let's say, these discharges of energy that appear to be like a light, what we call orbs. By the way, this is a question that I get asked a lot. Not all orbs are real. Sometimes it's just dust in a camera. There is only one way to know it. When you measure the ions, the charge in the air, then you will know, because when these things are real, you will have a very charged environment, right? And this was also replicated in the laboratory, where they were able to create these luminous spheres with 5 kilovolts per inch of direct current. And that created a glowing sphere of ionized air. So going back to temples, there is a lot of things as we can see as an example. So this is monasteries in the Crimea in Russia. And with red, you can see the location of the monasteries, and with gray are the different fault lines. It's very interesting now to see that most of them, if not all, they are just concentrated in areas that are cross-section of faults or faults by themselves. So one would wonder, why would they do that? And second, how did they know? Also, if we analyze all these mounds and stone chambers, I'm talking about artificial mounds, for example, Silbury Hill that we see here in the picture in UK, we will realize that they are constructed with alternating of organic and inorganic layers, basically creating like a Reich energy accumulator, right? And the top was usually covered with stone, and they actually wanted to accumulate the energy of the ground in the top and use it, as you will see later. Stone circles, there is a lot of research around them. This is the geomagnetic field intensity in Stonehenge, and in left we see ultrasound measurements in rhyolite stones. The stones themselves are producing a pulse, specific pulse that can be measured. Very interesting. And now these are maps. These are maps that I have created, and I actually did a lot of research on that, and I was trying to see whether the location of, for example, the megalithic monuments here in UK, they have any correlation with the map. So here is a very strong correlation of the radon. And actually the highest correlation is in Cornwall, that is there in the bottom left. And also because we have the highest levels of radon. So why would they place all their megaliths in the places that had the highest radioactivity and they had high levels of radon? It's a good question. Looking at pyramids, as I was saying before, projections such as artificial hills or pyramids, they actually attract the atmospheric positive electric fields, and the negative load from the ground is actually concentrated in the top. That goes again and again, but basically we know that they are just accumulators and they concentrate the energy on the top. That's the important thing to remember. Looking in ancient Greek temples, just as an example, we can see here the analysis of Peloponnese, which is a part of South Greece. And you can see the temples in blue and the fault lines in purple. So again, here there is the highest percentage of them, they actually are located on a fault or very near one. And again, why would they place their temple over a fault, even if they knew and they did it deliberately? Because you cannot have over 90% of these temples located on a fault if they didn't know how to locate them. But the question then is, a seismic fault can only bring a problem in terms of the structure, right? If there is an earthquake, it will destroy the building. It can destroy the building. So practically it wouldn't make sense. That's what I thought, at least. So that's the first parameter that I found equivalent all around the world, is the earth link. The second part is the building design, where there are three important parameters here. One is the geometry and shape. The second part is the materials, and the third part is the dimensions. So this is a subject that it's very vast again. It's all around sacred geometry and how form can affect energy. This started with cymatics. Many of you have heard of it, but basically this proves that geometry is actually linked to frequency, and frequency is linked to properties. Different frequencies have different properties. We already know that. So that means that using different shapes and different geometries by itself can give us very different properties. There is a lot of research on that I don't have the time to present today, but basically we know, I'll just give you a simple example, that using pyramids to preserve fruit can keep it fresh up to 3 weeks compared to no pyramid. And then there is other examples that scientific research, but basically what I would like for you to remember is that think about a room and you just fill it with water. The way the water will move has to do with the shape of the place. And the same goes with energy. So energy will move different, and energy will be different with a different shape. Professor Mail did a lot of research on that, and he found out that the best transmitter should be built as a tuned cavity. And this is a modern magnetron that you're looking into here. But basically, the ancient temples were created like tuned cavities. And that's the reason that they created these layers, right? There is a layer of columns, then there is wall, and another layer of columns, because they wanted to create these alternating layers. So they create these resonators, these capacitors, as we will see. So they wanted basically to use the energy either of the earth or of the vacuum or the astronomical energy, as we will see. And the best way to use it the most efficient way to use it is through specific proportions. And of course, there is where we find golden ratio, and we find it a lot. Obviously, there are other ratios in temples, but that's very important because we know that's the most efficient way to distribute energy, right? All the work of the winter. I will not go deeper into that, but there is a lot of other things into why this sacred geometry is used. Arturo will also talk about it after me. For those that you don't know him, Arturo is my husband and my partner. We have the Geophilia Institute together. He's also an architect. So the second part is temple materials. As I mentioned before, as an example here, Stonehenge, they brought 30-ton blue stones, 30 tons each. They were transported 140 miles across mountains, valleys, rivers. Why? The altar stone was brought 180 miles away from Cornwall. That would not make sense for a civilization that can just move things on wheels, on horses, right? It's impossible. But as we will see, these properties of the materials are super important. And looking in temples around the world, that's what we come down to, that they use stones that are high content in silica, magnesium, and also iron, and highly magnetic stones. This is very important. So basically, temples were very specifically placed on geophysical anomalies. The geometry of the temple was designed to structure the natural field of the earth that they were using as a power supply. And then that was amplified through the conductive materials of the building body. So that's to conclude the second part of the building body. Including measurement. I don't have the time to go deeper in that today, but basically what we call a sacred measure has to do with the Planck. The Planck unit, the smallest unit that we can observe in our world. We are allowed, like there is a limit there, that's the limit that we are allowed to reach as humans. And basically all the sacred measures basically come from that. So the food and all these other measures. What they wanted to do with this, what's called a sacred dimension, is that they wanted to link the microcosm and the macrocosm in the mesocosm of architecture. So bringing things from the Planck length and then, for example, using things that have to do with the diameter of the earth, they created a resonance there. So remember, we want resonant oscillators. That's the one role of the temple, right? So the best way to do it is through sacred measurement. So we not only have the shape and the design, we have to bring it in the right dimension, in proportion with the Planck length, with the Earth's dimensions, etc., etc. So the choice of dimensions that are linked to the Planck length and its harmonics, especially through the phi ratio, they generate fractality. And as I said, this makes temples link and be resonant with the microcosmic and the macrocosmic constructions. And the last part, the third part that is also found in temples around the world is the sky connection, so astronomical connection. So all ancient civilizations used archaeoastronomy for many different reasons, but one of them was definitely to incorporate it into their buildings. And making the temples as images of the stars, they were just blueprinting the sky, the macrocosm, right, into this world. Again, creating that other layer of fractality. So we have layers and layers of fractality from the shape and the design and the dimension and the connection to the sky. This is just a typical example. On the left, you can see the Xi'an pyramids in China, the Giza Plateau, Egypt temples, Teotihuacan, and then we have the Orion Belt. So it's very interesting why in different temples around the world, they will choose to blueprint the same constellation. And I can tell you that's not just for aesthetics or just to give it a symbolic meaning. It just creates a resonant frequency there. So now going to the bottom part of it, like, okay, good with all these parameters, but why were they really constructing these huge beings that are called temples today? Well, we are an electromagnetic being by nature. That's obvious. I will not go deeper into this, but you know, magnetite in the brain, and we have iron in the blood, and we are made out of 60% water that is superconductive. Basically, all our body has to do with electromagnetism. We are firstly an electromagnetic being, and secondly, a chemical being, because all the chemical functions depend on the electromagnetic functions. So it's super important, and there comes the therapy as well, right? So make sure you have the right electromagnetic field around you. You either create it by yourself through meditation, you either have it with an instrument such as therapy, or you have the right design of the space around you to surround you so you can have that support electromagnetically. This is just one example from my research. This is in Russia. What you see is that the incidence rate in red and yellow is far higher when we have faults, right? And in the junctions of the faults, the levels of cancer skyrocket. What am I trying to say with this? Yes, when there is a geophysical anomaly, that over the long term can create immune system problems such as cancer and other kinds of things. This is what I studied in my PhD. But there is a phenomenon that is not talked too much in modern science, at least it has been cut out, that is called hormesis. And hormesis is basically saying that any agent of stress can actually be beneficial or destructive according to the dose. If the dose is low, then it's beneficial. If the dose is high, it actually causes suppression. And this applies to a lot of things such as diets, exercise. Everybody knows that if you overdo exercise, you actually destroy your health. You don't help your health. The same applies to radiation. So no radiation at all, no background radiation, I'm talking about natural radiation, can cause a problem. High doses of radiation can also cause a huge problem, especially today that we have, like, we are bombarded with all these kinds of artificial radiation. But low doses of, for example, natural ionizing radiation are necessary because they activate various functions in the body and especially the immune system. So we know that low gamma radiation can help with stimulation of DNA repair and detoxing and production of stress proteins, etc., etc. But I want you to keep in mind a very important example. For example, we know that cell phone radiation can cause us cancer, but guess what? Short term, the same amount of radiation in short term has been proven to cure brain cancer in rats. I mean, that's extraordinary. So the problem is not what the radiation is, it's the dosage that makes the difference. Please keep that in mind for everything in your life because it applies to everything. It's such an important and deep concept. And also it's where the golden mean comes. It's the golden path. It's finding that perfect dose, the golden mean. It's not an extreme. It's not a very low dose or a very high dose. Possible functions of temples, according to my own scientific research. There might be more, but that's where I have come to that I have proof of, scientifically speaking. Firstly, they were definitely used as a healing technology. We know that temples of Asclepios in ancient Greece, for example, were specifically used for healing. People were asked to stay overnight, only for one night, sleep in the temple, and ask for the god to appear in their dreams and tell them how they might be healed. And there are countless writings from this time saying that, oh, this person was blind and he slept one night in the temple and then he could see the next morning because the god came and healed him. So now that you know where they were placed and how they're created, and they're these perfect therapies of the ancient times, just in a far bigger version, it can happen. these things can happen. Obviously, they were assisted with herbs, and they were assisted with nutrition and fasting and prayer and all these things in conjunction to create these amazing results. Second part is altered states of consciousness. So I have a lot of research around that. For example, for people that have been exposed in specific frequencies that have been found in temples. And for example, they had one side of them, they had kind of microscopic seizures that lead to what we call a mystical experience or altered states of consciousness. And research shows actually that they could access far more the right lobe, the right temporal lobe in the front. Okay, so that's intuition, and that's all these things that we call kind of paranormal. But this is something measurable, and there is a lot of data around it. But geomagnetic fluctuations can create that, definitely. Third possible function is the seed growth enhancement. So we know that lightning can serve as a fertilizer. It's an electromagnetic fertilizer because it can actually help the plants use nitrogen more. There are a lot of examples from seeds that have been placed on pyramids, and they grew far more, 3 times more, 10 times more, and this can be replicated through the TheraPhi and technologies that, they make the seed more, have a higher bioactive field, basically. That makes sense why so many seeds have been found in ancient temples. People might think that it's a blessing or it's an offering or all these things, but personally, I think they were using the temple to charge these seeds. And then what better to have a technology that gives food to your people in abundance. I mean, if a civilization doesn't have food, then it will perish. I mean, there is no space for anything more. So providing the food is super important from ancient times till today. The last function is energy generation. This is a research from Russian physicists, and they actually just simulated the materials and the shape of the Great Pyramid, and they found that it actually accumulates the energy due to its design, on their quote. Modern applications, so we have the 3 elements of temple creation, as I said: earth link, building design, and sky connection. And for me, it has become very clear that they were a very complex technology used for various functions. They were an investment for people's well-being in all ways, with what we already saw. Having decoded the main pillars of their formulation, this allows us to recreate this technology. As I said in the beginning, that's a part of my mission, to create it in modern spaces. We spend more than 90% of our time inside buildings. And through the science also of epigenetics that has shown us that the environment is the one that can affect our cellular DNA, turning on and off gene expression accordingly, the environment of the cell, inside the body, the intracellular fluids, but also the environment around us. So we can realize that the building environment can positively or negatively affect our biology. We have found the way to recreate this temple technology through what we call in geophilia the science of space harmonics. So we design spaces to support health, well-being, and transformation. I invite you to visit our website. And to close up, I'll just share a few nice things with you. This is just some examples of our work. Arturo will be sharing more details on that. We have a beautiful book that is based on all my research and PhD. You can find it on Amazon. It's called The Power of Sacred Location. Dan Winter has given us also a foreword. I have all this information on far more, with far more maps and details and videos in the Resonance Academy. My course is called The Sacred Science of Ancient Temples. If you want to go deeper, feel free to go there and ask me any question. And now for the last part, I wanted to share something that is very dear to my heart. Is a temple research that we are planning to start within Greece and want to expand worldwide. We have now the permit from the archaeological authorities for 50 ancient Greek temples. As we speak, there are 2 of them that we are ready to start, and we are just waiting for the funding, because every temple requires a lot of funding, because we are a team, interdisciplinary team of scientists and professors and engineers and experts. But what we want to do is we want to analyze these temples scientifically and go deeper in these conclusions. So these are just looking in Greece, the different temples. And we want to do biomedical research, so testing people in and out of the temple, and also geophysical research with all this equipment that we have, and also classical geophysics. So this is my conclusion. They were an investment for people's well-being, absolutely. This is the first temple in Crete that we want to start with. It's called Asclepion of Lendas. And the last goodie that I want to share with you, and I will leave you for today, is if you go to geophilia.org and you leave your email there, you can get a really deep PDF that we created that is called The 7 Secrets to Create a Sleep Sanctuary. Sleep is super important for our health, for our well-being, for our gene that Roger was talking before, and kidney health, and so on and so forth, so many different things. We have solutions for a lot of things. You can read the PDF. It's all free. It's a lot of pages and 15 years of research into that. So I invite you to go there and download it, and you will have a lot of information how to help your sleep. So that's from me for today. Thank you so much for listening.